Hi, and welcome back to U.S. History with Mr. Snyder. And today, for our first lesson of the school year, we're going to be talking about the American Revolution, causes, and results. So your learning targets for today are to describe how Europe sort of carved up North America prior to this. We'll talk about the democratic ideals and how those kind of change over time for Europe and America. We'll identify the causes of the American Revolution and the major events of said revolution and the results. So let's go ahead and get started. In the French and Indian War, the British and a group of Indians are fighting the French and a group of Indians in the New World. Britain wins, and this basically throws France out of the New World, and they cede all of their land in North America to Great Britain and Spain. It's a costly victory, though, and Great Britain spends itself into debt, and they sort of blame the colonists. They say, you're not pulling your fair share. You're not contributing enough for the war. So they try to recoup some of this debt by taxing colonies for providing protection to them. And they don't give them any representation in Parliament, and the colonists don't think this is fair. So leftover sentiments from this French and Indian War, the fallout from this lead to the American Revolution 10, 15 years later. So here you can sort of see the French in the pre-war boundaries on the left finally are thrown out of North America. Spain gets all of the land to the west of the Mississippi River. Britain gets all of the land to the east of the Mississippi River and north of it into Canada. And the Proclamation Line of 1763 kind of was a boundary where the colonies would have to stop for their own protection from Indians. But after that, they sort of move west and ignore that. So life in the colonies is different depending on where you were, whether you were in New England, in the middle colonies, or in the southern colonies. And basically, let's kind of know some of the differences between them. In the north, it's not a lot of farming, and these differences are going to eventually lead to the Civil War. Not a lot of farming in the north because of the Appalachian Mountains and rocky soil, so they're mostly engaged in trade and commerce. In the south, it's farming, large cash crops such as tobacco at this time, eventually cotton. In the middle colonies, it's a little bit of both. In the south, you have mostly Protestant, but there's some Catholics. In New England, you have mostly the Puritans. And in the middle, again, it's most religions are tolerated. So that's basically what you need to know. The differences are between the New England and the South, and then the middle is sort of a little bit of both. So where does the colonist sense of democracy come from? Well, two main places in England. The Magna Carta is the first document ever that influences and restricts the power of the king. So it forces King John to proclaim certain liberties for his subjects. No subject could be punished except by the law of the land, so the king couldn't just dole out sentences anymore. That still exists today in our Bill of Rights. And this influences settlers in New England and the writers of the Declaration and eventually the Constitution. The English Bill of Rights is also passed, and this lists out the rights that English citizens, English subjects had. And some of these things are the basis for our modern U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights, such as monarchs cannot act as judges. You cannot prevent people from bearing arms. You cannot create a standing army. You cannot impose a punishment without a trial. You cannot take away certain rights, such as free speech. All of this is the basis for our modern U.S. Bill of Rights. The Enlightenment is basically a period of time lasting about 100 years or so to where people start thinking differently. And this is mostly a European idea, but ideas from it are brought to America. And the definition of the Enlightenment is that we're using human reason to solve problems. We don't need to look to authority. We can use our own minds to do it. So some famous people from the Enlightenment: Isaac Newton, John Locke, Rousseau, Hume, Voltaire. These are well-educated philosophers, and well-educated colonists start to use these ideas to improve everyday life. And some people apply this reason to political problems and social problems. And one person we're going to focus in on is John Locke. John Locke, his ideas were the separation of powers, which is in our U.S. Constitution. The natural rights are in our Declaration of Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness, or what are property rights. And social contract theory is the basis of our Declaration. We have a contract with the government. We give up some rights as citizens in order for them to protect other rights. When they stop protecting those rights, that government is allowed to be overthrown. And that is what the basis of our Declaration of Independence is. So that all comes from John Locke. The Great Awakening comes out of this and also helps lead to the American Revolution. This is a very religious movement, a very Protestant movement. There's Protestant revivals. New churches are born, and people start flocking to these new churches. And it causes people to rethink ideas about the church and state, institutions, and all of society in general. And basically people start asking themselves, if we can worship ourselves, why don't we govern ourselves? So let's kind of wrap all this up. We talked about the three long-term causes of the revolution: the Enlightenment, the Great Awakening, and the French and Indian War. Now let's get into some more of the immediate causes of the revolution. The British are taxing the colonists. We talked about that. The colonists eventually protest and resist paying. The British king is stubborn and refuses to compromise, and so the colonists declare independence. Here are some of the taxes the British levied. The important ones you need to know about are the last three. The Stamp Act basically levied a tax on all printed materials, and to let people know you paid the tax, you had to get this stamp on it. The Townshend Acts, after the Stamp Act was repealed, they do the Townshend Acts, and they do it on imports. So things that the colonists can't make themselves and they have to import, they tax. Eventually that's repealed. And the Coercive Acts, or the colonists called them the Intolerable Acts, is the punishment for the Boston Tea Party. And it closed Boston Harbor to trade, increases the power of the governor, and cuts off land claimed by several colonies. And the colonists say enough is enough after these Intolerable Acts. Here's more key events. We talk about this Stamp Act, Townshend Acts. Boston Massacre is in there, where 4 people are killed. 4 people is not a massacre, but it's the principle of the thing. The colonists were throwing rocks at the British soldiers, and the British soldiers fired into the crowd, killing 4. Boston Tea Party, Intolerable Acts are a response to that. And finally, the colonists meet in the First Continental Congress to talk about the punishment for the Boston Tea Party. They meet for 7 weeks in Philadelphia, and they basically say, okay, we're going to meet again if Britain continues to enforce the Tolerable Acts. Within that time, or after that time, the battles of Lexington and Concord occur. British troops try to seize a weapons armory. New Englanders and the Minutemen respond, and the war begins. Nobody knows who fired the first shot, whether it was us or them, but Ralph Waldo Emerson coined it and said it was the shot heard round the world. Later the next month, the Second Continental Congress convenes, and this is our government. This is basically our functioning government of the United States until the end of the war. And finally, after a lot of debate, the Declaration of Independence is adopted by Congress on July 4th, 1776. And what it does is it asserts our natural and legal rights, including the right to overthrow the government, who no longer protects natural rights, such as Britain, and it lists grievances against King George. And it also says the colonies are not a part of the British Empire and are now independent states. And it's tough going at first, but we do get military assistance from France because they are Britain's biggest international rival, so they want to see Britain lose their colonies. And we finally win at the Siege of Yorktown, where French troops surround Yorktown and force British General Cornwallis to surrender. It takes some time to get the treaty around and to stop the battles out on the frontier, but the U.S. is now free and independent from Great Britain, and we have new boundaries. Florida is ceded to the Spanish, so Florida is our boundary to the south. We have all the land to the Mississippi River to the west, and the Great Lakes to the north. Britain still claims Canada, and Spain also gets everything west of the Mississippi River. And that is basically the American Revolution, short form. So fill out your learning targets, bring your questions to class, and I'll see you then. Bye-bye.